So I would love to introduce our illustrious panelists. So I'm going to read their bios because I've had the situation in which people have introduced me and they don't quite get it right. So I feel like if I read the bio, then I won't make a mistake. So Gennie Rim, right here in the middle, is an Emmy Award-winning and Oscar-nominated writer-producer with 25 plus years in animation. While at Pixar, she has worked on The Incredibles, Kahrs, and Ratatouille, then joined Disney on Bolt and Tangled. In 2013, she left to become CEO at Glen Keane Productions, where Gennie produced the Academy Award-winning film Dear Basketball, with animation legend Glen Keane and the late great Kobe Bryant. Gennie's most recent feature film, Over the Moon, for Netflix, was a 2021 Academy Award nominee for Best Animated Feature, which showcased an all-Asian American Pacific Islander cast. Woo! In 2023, she launched her own production company, Align Pictures, to write and develop her own personal projects. And then to her right is her husband, John Kahrs, animation director. John has been at the leading edge of the animation industry since 1990, where he worked as one of Blue Sky Studios' very first employees. From 1996 to 2006, he was an animator at Pixar with credits on A Bug's Life, Toy Story 2, Monsters, Inc., The Incredibles, Kahrs, and Ratatouille. In 2006, John became instrumental in the revitalization of Walt Disney's feature animation division, where he supervised the animation on Tangled. In 2013, John won the Academy Award for his short film Paperman, a revolutionary hybrid of 2D and 3D animation. John went on to direct award-winning short films for Google and Lyft. He then joined Netflix to co-direct the Oscar-nominated animated feature Over the Moon. John currently is in development at Netflix Animation. Woo. All right. Now let's introduce Kimson Albert. Three-time Emmy-nominated Kimson has been directing and producing animation on various animated projects for TV and film for over 30 years. Starting his career in New York City on MTV's Beavis and Butthead, he worked his way through the New York animation scene. Working with different studios, he gained experience and worked as an animation director in Adult Swim's The Venture Brothers for over 6 seasons. In 2016, his talents brought him to Cartoon Network in Los Angeles, where he worked as supervising animation director on OK, KO, Let's Be Heroes, Steven Universe, HBO Max's Adventure Time, Distant Lands. For Disney TV Animation, Amphibia Season 3, and Haley's on It. In 2023, he directed his first live-action short film, Exposure, which played the Urban World Film Festival in New York City, Pan-African Film Festival in Los Angeles, and the SIF in Seattle. Currently, he's supervising animation director on the Among Us series based on the popular mobile game, produced at Titmouse Studios, and he lives in Burbank, California. Yeah. All right, so we have an amazing panel here. So we have only one mic, so we got to share it like a joint. So let's go with the first question. What is it exactly that you do?
What happened there? Right now I don't do anything. I'm just trying to get all the boats out of the water before we go back to LA for the winter. But what do I do? You mean as in my capacity as an animator or animation
Like,
director?
what's your day-to-day life?
I mean, I just animated on Wish at Disney like a year and a half ago.
Okay.
And it was exactly the same as when I'd left in like 2013. Like nothing had changed. So the moment to moment was like very much clocking in and just you're focused on the machine. As an animator would be focused on the cell or the pegboard for hours, and then you leave, and then it's very monotonous. It's very like, for the ADHD kid that I was, it was this incredibly focusing thing that I was doing as a teenager, and it blossomed into a career which I'm very thankful for. But as an animation supervisor, then you're just like, up to 10 o'clock at night, you're just like putting out fires and, keeping people on track. At least when you're not in dailies or any kind of review. When you're in a review, you're keeping people on track and you're talking about the eyes. Because when you're in animation, eyes are the most important thing. So all of your comments, like 80% of your comments are about the eyes, I think, or the weight or the physics. So yeah, that's what I do. If you're talking about exactly what I do.
Yes.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I think also for right now though, in directing, developing, directing, and that's where I'll talk about what I do, which is as a producer, I'll work with the director, and a director will have a vision, whether it's a script that they have written or an idea that they have, and we basically figure out how to make these characters, this world, all come to life in a succinct 88-minute film. And I help to figure out how to make that vision come alive, either through developing the script, or I'm also looking at budgets, which is not always the most beautiful part of the process, but it does help to see like what are your not only limitations, but where can you get really creative about creating the thing that you want to do with limitations and the resources that you have. So as a producer, that's what I do, and that's, I guess, what I've been doing lately.
So I, unlike them, I work in television animation, which is a little different beast. If you were to compare it to like making cars, they make like Rolls Royces, and I make like Hugos or Hyundais or whatever. And the only reason I say that is because the time that we have to make our episodes is very short, and we have to turn around the process pretty quickly, and then we also repeat that process for over a season, which could take up to 3 years. But what I do exactly as an animation director on the shows that I've been on is basically, if there's an assembly line to make the episode, I'm towards the end of the assembly line, and what I do is I'm actually choreographing the drawings. I'm giving the drawings the amount of time they need to be on screen. I'm doing the mouth positions. I'm really kind of the nuts and bolts of how the movement will work and all these kind of things. My background in animation helps me be a director in that sense, an animation director in that sense. I haven't actually animated a scene in a really, really long time, since a lot of the stuff that I work on is actually animated overseas. Sometimes we do in-house stuff, but yeah, that's basically what I do. And again, the major difference I would say is that my schedule is different, so the culture of how we do it is a little different in that sense.
That's fascinating. So this is the inevitable. How did you get your start question? And do you have to go to art school?
I'll start. So I, probably like most people in animation, was drawing at like a very young age. At 4, I was really into comic books. I was just sketching all the time. I was obsessed with drawings, movies, drawings, comic books, and yeah, I knew probably by the age of 9, I knew I wanted to be be in cartoons, to make cartoons. And so I eventually, after high school, I applied to NYU Film School. I got into NYU and graduated with a degree in animation. And after I graduated, my first job was Beavis and Butthead in New York, the original. And that was like a perfect entry for me. So for me, I did go to quote unquote art school. So yeah.
I did not draw when I growing up. I grew up in my mom's small restaurants. We had a pizza place, so I really knew how to do a lot of taking orders, getting them done, and then giving them to the customers. And I think that kind of prepped me for how a producer works in terms of, okay, you've got a lot of things coming at you, and you gotta get it organized and get it out and make everybody happy at the end of the day. So I grew up with this mentality. I had no idea about animation going into college, and then I always say serendipitously, animation picked me because one day, animation director named Ed Bell in San Francisco. Do you know Ed Bell?
Heard of it?
Yeah, he's a good friend. He walked into my mom's restaurant one day. It's my first semester of college. He's a very chatty guy, and he just started kind of chatting about his work and what he did, and said he was looking for an assistant. And I ended up going in to apply, and I got it, and I was like transported into this universe that I had no idea existed, which was about creativity and being an artist for a living. I never could imagine that. And I walked in the doors, and I remember people were walking around like it was like a circus. And it was like people just having so much fun drawing, doing animation on the computer, on paper, like there was stop motion, there was like every kind of medium in this small little studio in San Francisco, and that kind of became my art school, because there's no way I could have learned as much as I did there had I not been invited to be in that world. And I learned as much as I could. I just kind of absorbed every interaction I could. I was trying to learn about everything. And then eventually led me to joining Pixar, and then Disney, and then Netflix. But that's really how I started. So no, you don't have to go to art school, but learn as much as you can wherever you can.
I guess I was making a lot of flip books as a kid because I needed to understand like how things moved, and I didn't know what was going on with animation. I noticed like Tom and Jerry looked really good because it was on ones, and it was like really refined work. And like Spider-Man is on, Spider-Verse is on twos. It has that kind of harsh, granular feel. But so I very early noticed those things, where I noticed that Three's Company looks different than Cheers. Mom, Dad, don't you understand? They look completely different. Don't you see that? And they're like, no. Well, one was on video, the other was on film, and I was obsessed with those kinds of things. But I think that kind of rolled into obsession with Tron. Even my flip books looked like Tron. This is the 1979 Tron, and I went to art school, and then I think the computer animation kind of hurricane was starting to spool up around the mid to late 80s when I was in art school. And then so by 90 to 95 was like, it was really gaining a lot of traction, and I was already in the industry. And then in 94, 95 was Jurassic Park and Toy Story came out, and so those two things, like in terms of the animation serving the effects industry and being like photoreal, and then animation completing, computer animation doing an entire feature film for the first time. Those two kind of landmark events happened, and then it was like, the whole industry just kind of blew up after that, and I just rode the wave over the next 20 years, which was exciting. So I feel like when I started, animation was kind of weird and esoteric, and there wasn't a lot happening. It was like the Black Cauldron and the Bakshi movies and leftovers from the 50s and 60s, and even like Little Mermaid was kind of like a star in the darkness, there wasn't like the explosion of content, anything like that. There was nothing like that at the time. And then as I rolled into the industry, I think the amount of work being done just kind of exploded. So I feel very fortunate in terms of my timing and my intersection with that.
So how did you overcome career setbacks?
That's a deep question. Yeah, I mean, I don't know how many people here are really interested in the animation industry as much as they are in the content. But right now, the animation industry is definitely suffering, I should say, or at least taking a lot of blows in the past 2 to 3 years. I've been really fortunate that for some reason my name is like being spoken when I'm not around, and I get a random email always at the right time asking me to join a new crew. So I've been very, very fortunate in that sense. There were times, especially in New York, when we didn't have a lot of work, and you kind of have to ride the wave. You have to find other ways of expression. Fortunately, I never really had to leave animation as a way of making, a living. I don't know exactly how to answer that. You know, it's really surfing. I think what you said about surfing is really a great metaphor, because there are these incredible highs when you're on a show that is really, where the crew is nice and you're really into the material. Like when I was working on Steven Universe, you know, I was discovering the material as I was working on it, and I was like, oh, this is so different than anything I've worked on, content-wise. And I don't know if you're familiar with the series, but if you are, you're probably familiar with the kind of impact it had. If you're not, it had a tremendous impact on a certain age group, a demographic, and really kind of touched people's lives in ways that I didn't understand until, you know, I went to Comic-Con and saw you know, I was at Comic-Con at one of the panels, and, you know, it was just really electric. It was almost like a concert. It was really powerful. So the setback, you know, that was like so engaging to work on something you're really attached to. And then there are times when you know, there's nothing. There's like no work, and who's not getting, you know, the calls, and everybody's lamenting and that kind of stuff. So community is a big deal. You know, what is it? I don't know what the statistic of how many animators live in the United States, but I'm sure it's, you know, is it maybe 20,000? You know what I mean? Out of 300 million people, right? So we're a very small amount of people who have a very particular experience. And
I think when I see Spider-Verse, it gives me a lot of hope, but also gives me a lot of concern of like, okay, well, where are the studio heads going to want to invest in things? But it does show like an inspiring moment of like, if a big studio like Sony can invest in a movie like Spider-Verse that shows all the different facets of what animation could be today, it gives me a lot of hope. And I guess going back to the original question of the setback of animation, I think we are at a very interesting time of animation where, yeah, a lot of people are probably wondering, should I go into this industry as like a student, or even as a veteran, like should I get out of this industry and find something? Because like, what is the long-term horizon? It's so cloudy, we don't know. But what I do know is like the art form still has a lot more to give in the world. I don't know what that means in terms of like financial stability for people, but that idea of community has always been there for me, at least. And I think also the way that the industry is designed, it is project to project, so you're always starting knowing that there is going to be this end date. And wrap parties and wrap dates are a huge part of just once you start, you know there's a finite time. It's not like a 20-year, you know, project. So you're always kind of knowing there's going to be an end. So you just kind of savor it, especially if you have a really good crew and you're on a really good project. You kind of like, you just love your job every single day because you know it might not be that way on the next project. So it's kind of a philosophy of life of just like enjoy the moment and then let's see what happens kind of thing.
You're like, I don't have career setbacks.
I never had a setback. Everything's been amazing. No, as you were asking, I was thinking there's kind of two kinds of setbacks. One is like personal, internal, and one is like external, like the world changed around you. And the internal ones I think are interesting to me because it always comes down to like, well, I wasn't listening, like I wasn't paying attention, and that's why something bad happened. Like, or I wasn't reading the room. I didn't have like nunchi. Do you know what nunchi is? This Korean word for your ability to kind of sense the read the room, basically. And a lot of my, like recently we bid on a job for a very large company to do a like anniversary thing, and I had a very single-minded vision of what I thought was so cool, and we were sure we were going to get the job, but we didn't. We didn't get the phase 2, and the bottom line is over the next 2 weeks I realized like I was totally not having any nunchi at all about that. I wasn't reading the room, and I wasn't really listening, and I could definitely say that a lot of setbacks, something happens like you didn't get a role, it leads back to some time where you weren't listening, or you weren't paying attention, or you weren't responsive to the what was happening around you in a way that was a detriment to the work. The other kind is like, well, the world changed, and you had to like pivot and respond to it. Like, because I think now animation is going through a weird time. But I won't dive into that one right now. But why? Oh, okay. Well, I mean, I hear different things like LA is dead. Like, no one's working in LA. Like, live action crews are like, people are just dying out there. They're not getting any work. It's been dry for months and months. But then there's other things like, well, there's 500 television shows being made right now, and there's never been anywhere near that number before. But they're all being made in, maybe they're all being made in states that have huge tax rebates, like, you know, Albuquerque, New Mexico, or Georgia or something. And animation has a similar thing where the push to outsource has been ferocious. So, and the companies that give the tax rebates are, you know, like Australia and Canada, Spain, Ireland. They're all giving these like really huge tax rebates, like 30, even 40%. So any accountant, any bean counter in animation is like, there's nothing you can say to convince me that I should not make my movie in Australia, dude. Like, I'm not gonna get a 30% savings. But that's a whole other thing that I could go on about. But I'm definitely part of the problem with that, because I'm also in roles where I'm facilitating the outsourcing, which is a weird feeling that I have mixed feelings about, because it's great work for me, but you're kind of training up the global market to eventually replace the domestic market, and so that's definitely a strange thing to be a part of. But there's also another thing where, like, animation in the 80s was like, if you were getting into animation then you really were into it, because like there was nothing going on. So if you did it, you loved it. And it's almost going back to a time where if you really want to get into animation now, you really, really gotta love it.
Yeah.
And you gotta fight to get up in there, because it's like an industry built on like people that are scrappy. But I think that the mindset of like, well, it has to be made overseas for this reason is not necessarily valid for a number of reasons. Like, there are a lot of amazing reasons that are still there to make animation in the U.S. But I digress.
Okay.
Setbacks.
Serena's like,
All right, so my next question is, so on your cruise, you might be seeing that there's a demand for certain roles that there maybe, because like not everybody can be an animation director or producer or writer, but maybe they need like global facilitators of logistics, or they need grips or booms, or I don't know, I'm just making stuff up because I don't know anything, but is there a certain role that people are hiring for more? Is there a demand?
I mean, that's tough because it's always production specific.
okay.
And each production has its own recipe. You'd think by now that, especially in television, because they make so much, that there would be some sort of standard that applies across studios, across shows. And I'm so amazed, especially when I moved to LA from New York, how much people who work in animation don't understand how to make animation. And especially on the production side. And it's not really their fault, but, it is, but it's more about like, I think to answer the question, which is across the board, which is that there's sort of a lack of mentorship in, depending on the crew that you're on. When I came up in New York, I actually worked with old timers that had worked on shows that I grew up with. Now I'm the old timer. The kids are like, oh, I watched that. You know, animation tends to skew young in terms of the crews, but there was a mentorship there, and studios used to be a place where you could learn from the quote unquote old timers, or the people who had a lot of experience. And I thought that when I was very young, I was still super thirsty, even though I'd graduated. You know, I was really thirsty for knowledge, constantly like looking over the shoulders of these guys who, you know, and sometimes they'd be like, get away, why you bother me, or whatever, but you just constantly be asking questions. So there's a mentorship thing that happens Each crew is different. Each crew requires something, you know, kind of specific. But especially when you get into supervisor roles, that's when the mentorship really needs to happen. Because most people in entry level, they can draw what you ask them to draw, or you hope they can, and then you're saying, you know, and again, I'm just being very basic. 3D pipelines are different than 2D pipelines. So I'm just speaking of a 2D pipeline, hand drawn stuff. You know, you're basically moving the job from one, I guess for football, like from one down to the next, from one yard to the next, and then passing it off to the next person. So you hope that you can do that well. When you get to a supervisor position, like John was saying, like, you know, you're trying to put out fires because all these departments have issues, and you're trying to be like, well, that guy didn't do it right, or this person didn't do it right, so I have to do it. You know, so that's where the mentorship really comes in, because now it's a lot more people skills. So, again, long-winded way to answer your question. I think the demand is for capable people in supervisor positions. That's what I'm seeing, and I'm noticing. I've heard producers tell me this and all this, and you know, but without a mentorship or without some sort of, because I take it on myself to always kind of, if I see somebody who doesn't know it, I'll be like, hey, this is how I do it, you know. And for this production, it might be better to do it this way. It's more efficient, blah blah. And I mean, literally, it's like, how do you make coffee? It's simple 1, 2, 3 step. You know, maybe you can fudge this a little bit, but it's, you know, it's not rocket science really when you understand it. So I think the mentorship in terms of good supervising is really, really important. I think that's something that is lacking and needed. That's my perception.
Yeah, I think that mentorship thing is definitely valid across all, even like you say, production. Because I think that's the thing you look at in production. You're like scheduling everything in a spreadsheet, and you're like, it works. See, it works. And then you go down to the crews, and you're like, this is impossible.
Right.
Like, there's no physical way this can happen. So I think that's a part of mentorship on the production side of like understanding, like, okay, you can learn everything about, you know, schedules and budgets, but you need to go and learn your crew. You need to go and learn what their actual capacity and abilities are, and then you can hone in on where are the savings that you're looking for. Don't just find them in the spreadsheet, find them in your crew, like get to know them. So I would say communication for me has always been a big thing when I staff up my crews. I just need people who can understand that communication is important, even if you don't know the skills yet and how to be a good communicator, that you're willing to learn what that means, and that you're willing to kind of go out of your comfort zone and say, like, okay, I'm gonna have a conversation that I maybe don't know how to have, and I'm gonna ask people, like, how should I go about this, you know, so that you can become, like, at least on the production side, on the producer side, you can hone in onto the problem sooner than later, because most of the times the problems are just because no one's willing to, like, point it out or talk about it because it's uncomfortable. But so for me, that's what I'm looking for mostly in a crew,
Good
just to go back to,
communicators.
yeah, or willing to learn how to communicate.
What was the question?
What role or skill sets are in high demand?
Oh. Well, to me, it's like the glue between the studios and the vendors. And if the vendors are overseas, like Netflix is making, they're developing the movies, and they're storyboarding the movies, and they're taking them all the way up to editorial, and even like modeling stuff and doing a little bit of like tinkering around with world building, and lots of production design and tons of beautiful paintings. But then it stops, and then somebody has to pick it up and run with it in Sydney, Australia, or Vancouver, or whatever. So the person that glues the studio in Burbank to the vendor overseas is a critical person. And if like the studio just wants to be like, just take this stuff and go handle it, go make it. We want to trust you to deliver a product that like is, or deliver a process that is smooth running and delivers a high quality result. I mean, it sounds very dry, but like that's all anyone really wants from like they have a blueprint and they want the house to get built.
Right.
But the house is getting built really far away. So the people flying back and forth or even living there on site are very much in demand. So I would think. I know they are.
Thank you. Do any of you have questions for each other that you'd like to ask? Okay.
Yeah, hi, I'm Kimson. Nice to meet you guys. I hope the audience doesn't mind. I'm actually, when your John, your career trajectory, when you mentioned the Black Cauldron and all this time of when you kind of entered, these are the times that those are the films that made me want to do animation as a profession, you know. So, what was like your very first job? What was the first job you got hired to do in animation?
It was calibrating the film recorder, like running a calibration lookup table for a film recorder, and I think they're just like, can this guy like take instructions and do anything? Which I saw this video of that was at Blue Sky. It was like the first 2 months or something. But I saw this video of the West Point cadets like being thrown into the first week, and their parents say goodbye, and then they're like, "All right, do this and this and this," and half of them are just like wandering around confused, and they're like, "No, I told you 3 things to do." And they say it in a very military way, and it's extremely harsh and like angry because it's basic training. But what they're doing is they're finding out like, can a person follow instructions and like do the thing we asked them to do in order? And that's basically, I think, what they were asking me to do. And then it turned into like, can you model this little thing? Can you make this toilet paper unroll? Can you make this pill fall? Like it was all commercial work in the 80s of like pharmaceutical stuff. It's pretty, toothpaste tubes and then slowly I would start like doing a little animation here and there. But I was already animating. I was animating in flipbooks, and I was doing like 2D animation, and I had done animation in art school. So I knew like what animation, I kind of knew how to do it.
Right.
But the opportunities were like, we're a small shop. You gotta sweep up around the machinery here, you know. So it was that kind of apprenticeship type work. Yeah.
Do you have a question? Do I have a question? Okay, no. Or do you have another?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
See, I like to learn. So on the Dear Basketball project, which was like, kind of came out of nowhere for us in animation, like we didn't know that was coming, right? And we were like, what, Kobe, Glenn Keane? Like, so for Glenn Keane animated The Beast in Beauty and the Beast, Tarzan.
Yeah.
So,
Ariel.
Ariel, like huge Disney animator, like, you know, really launched character animation into the new century, and really connected to the old masters, Disney masters. And this is all on Google, you can go all this stuff. But anyway, so when you guys were working on that, the process of working with Glenn Keane, was that something that you were apprehensive about, or how did you approach that?
Definitely not apprehensive. So me and Glenn worked together at Disney. So I was at Disney starting 2008, and he was still at Disney at that time, and we worked very closely together, I think for about 3 years, and then Glenn decided to retire after almost 40-year run at Disney, and then soon after I left as well. And then about a year after that, we decided to, he asked me to come on to his company and run his company, and so we had done a few projects together, a couple of short films, one for Google, one for Paris Ballet, and so I was very familiar with working with Glenn before Dear Basketball. He is also a family friend of ours. He actually was our officiant at our wedding, so no apprehension.
Oh,
yeah, he was definitely family and still is, and I think that we worked really well together. So when Dear Basketball came about, which was unexpected for us too. But at that time, Kobe had started kind of seeing what was beyond his career. He hadn't announced his retirement at that time. He was just kind of really curious. Huge animation fan. Like he had prior to meeting us, he had gone to visit all the animation studios in LA and get to know them. And he was looking for partners to what I assume now was going to be Dear Basketball. We started actually talking about a different project, but then I think as things progressed, it was clear that Dear Basketball was going to be the project we did together. And him and Kobe, when they met, it was just like so natural, and there was just a clear, these two people really get each other. And Kobe really knew what he wanted the look to be. He really wanted it to have graphite lines. Like he really wanted to have that texture, something to hang on to that was physical. And so, you know, no one else better than Glenn Keane to hand animate, his retirement love letter to basketball. So that was, and Friday is tomorrow Friday? Yeah, is Kobe's birthday. So just
Thank you.
so that's my question. That's my answer.
Now I'd like to open it up and see if there's any questions out in the audience. I don't think you need the mic, it's quiet. I mean, it's pretty small. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm an independent animation director. I'm curious, like outside the studio system, have you guys been able to get work like from commercials or branded content, and like what's it like? How do you navigate that? Or who's the decision makers, stuff like that?
I can do it.
Off.
Off. Okay. Yes, you can do it, and please do it. It's not always easy because it's always like, well, how do you get a brand to finance your thing or whatever? I think we have a little company that we've done short films for Lyft and Google, and oftentimes it's like just building your reel, your portfolio, and getting out there. And I think if you can be a strong storyteller with a brand, that's what's most important. I think that's what brands need, is to bring the humanity into like what it is that they're trying to put out in the world, and you as a storyteller weaving that together. Independent films itself, that's always really, really hard, but I've personally been diving into the world of film grants and in the last 6 months, and I have to say there's actually quite a bit of opportunity out there. I see it all the time, like, and you just have to like kind of like putting your resume like out to every place that you can, like put out, just apply as many places you can and just see what happens. Keep refining whatever the story is that you're working on, like as much as possible, and you actually can make a lot of progress without funding. Surprisingly, sometimes you feel like, I need just some development funds to do this, but what I've learned is like whenever I feel like I can't move because I'm waiting for resources, if I just sit down and look at what I have available to me, it's actually a lot more than I actually believe. So I personally think that there is always like a creative well in you that can like move something forward, whether it's like putting together like a mood board for your short, or pulling together reference, or whatever it is that you're kind of feeling like you're stuck at, like just keep going out and finding the inspirations, and you'll be like, I'll add this thing to this thing that will just make it even more of a stronger sell to whoever ends up seeing it. So I don't know if that answers your question. I don't know if anybody wants to add anything else.
I think that this may speak a little bit to building a portfolio, but I'm curious about the role of social media having gone from sort of, photos to video, and with video more animation. Personally, my algorithm is full of animation. I've trained it well. In what you guys are seeing, especially with people coming up, what is the role of social media? Is it bigger than we think? Is it smaller than we think?
think it's huge. I think I know we have people who work on our shows who are way more popular than the show, just because of their. The thing is, they don't necessarily translate their popularity into money, right? So that's where the disconnect is. Just because everybody watches it doesn't mean that you're getting. So having a weekly check on a job that's not terrible in animation, right? So, and you're 26 or something, you know, it's a pretty good look. But yeah, I think it's tremendous. And there's a built-in audience. Your hashtag is your audience. It's like, you know, you just got to keep doing it, make the algorithm work for you, and you have an audience. YouTube, I have a friend, independent animator on YouTube, and like some of his shorts have like 7 million views, and I'm just looking, and he's like, I hate the studios, and we used to work on Beavis together. He's like, I can't work for a studio anymore, and I'm like, yeah, you're pretty successful as an independent. Like, he's a YouTube guy, and like every time he drops like a 2-minute short, this thing just, you know, flies. I don't know if you guys know Patrick Smith. He does, actually a lot of his style is reminiscent of the graphite style of Jir Basketball, but he's been doing this for, you know, years, 20 years. These kind of weird contortion transformations in pencil, and just kind of funny, you know. Anyway, yeah, Patrick is like, you know, kind of anti-studio, which I understand totally. But yeah, social media is, I feel like it's bigger, it's the best thing to happen to animation.
Yeah, I agree, because I think you have direct access to an audience that's willing to take a look at whatever it is that you want to put out there. So, yeah, it's huge. I don't know if you want to add to that.
Yeah, there's a series called Greg in LA. I don't know if anyone's ever seen it, but it's like micro skits, and that format, like I thought it'd be like Vine videos that are just a little bit longer, and then they would kind of grow into like a micro skit, like a little mini SNL, or they'd be serialized, and that's what Greg in LA is. They're only like 90 seconds or 2 minutes long, and they're on Insta. And I thought, why aren't these expanding more than they are? Like I thought there'd be, I thought that people would go, okay, the whole world is like fragmented into tiny, tiny little pieces that are really small, but let's let them grow and get a little more substantial. And then, not that we're going back to like the Elizabethan novels or something, but I thought that, you know, social media content would get a little more heft to it. But there is one thing, there's an expanding market in these like vertically swiped Korean webtoons, and that's an expanding market. I don't know what it is about that, but that people are kind of going crazy for it. Like, we were just in Korea, and everyone on the train is like, and they're coming to the U.S. and like there's a lot of cool stuff happening in that. And I've often thought, like, I would definitely want to board a show like in that vertical format to have it build an audience, and then you could maybe build animation on top of that, or embed animation into it somehow. But yeah.
Just to add to that, because I think also what social media does is also you're creating IP. That's your unique IP.
Is it, or does it belong to Instagram?
No, it's yours. Sure. Yeah, and so. Okay, well, check here with your lawyers. But I do think that it does give opportunity for you to create your own unique IP, and if it does build and garner an audience, that is currency. Because with these webtoons in Asia that I keep seeing, they are trying to expand them into full-fledged features or series like anime. So that is really important to understand your own ownership of your IP too. Sorry, didn't mean to. Yeah. Okay.
Also, I would say that after working on this Among Us project, which was a mobile game, you know, I would say it was successful as a game, so the translation into animation is something new. But you don't always have to launch with an animation as the initial content for the IP, right? So the webtoon or comic or something else, it's also an entryway into animation eventually, if that's part of your plan. You know?
Does anybody else? Oh wow, there's a lot. Okay.
I was wondering, so you all work studios and worked on pretty big projects and has a, done this as a career. Do you ever have your own independent projects where you're like, damn, I just got to tell this story and like launch off into a project?
These are the experts, right?
Well, you just did a short film too.
Yeah, well, I mean,
We talked about
yeah.
short
Well, I
films.
mean,
wanna know about it.
my short film is live action actually. So I kind of sidestepped the whole thing. My plan was always to do live action at some point. So yeah, that was something. It's been a 10-year long kind of process. I do have some animation ideas for a feature, but I think our thing, or I came up with a crew of animation people who always worked on their own stuff, and even working with Mike Judge on the original Beavis, like Beavis was a completely independent. He did it in his garage, so that was like the epitome of the example of what we wanted to do, which was like just make your own stuff, just constantly make your own stuff. No matter if you work for whoever, the brand they don't care about you the way you care about your stuff, right? So that's always been the spirit that I do this stuff with. So yeah, it's a tough thing, but you have to keep your vision. You have to. I worked jobs to pay for my film, so I would work a year and then take whatever I saved up to. So that's why it took so long, But yeah, you have to keep your vision like solid in the front. Yeah.
Sorry, I forgot what the question was.
Independent
Personal
project.
project. Yes, so being on the producer side, I didn't really think I was on the creative edge of things. I was more just like, I'm really good at taking someone's creative vision and helping them actually make it. And then something happened over the pandemic where, we all lost our minds and we're like, what is life? What is this? And I definitely came out of that going, wait, maybe I want to do something that's for myself. And so actually the last 2 years I've kind of taken a step back from what I was doing and just taking space for what creative projects I want to actually that want to come out. And there is a project that I've been writing and trying to explore what that could be. So yeah.
Do you want to talk about it, or not now?
No, I mean it's still incubating. So
Okay.
yeah, it's but yeah, I think absolutely trying to explore what that looks like for me.
Yeah, I have stuff. I just I'm not hustling right now very hard, but I will again. But one of the things that I was thinking about was there's this guy Wes Ball who made this really cool short called Ruin, which if you look it up on YouTube, it should still be there. It's like a chase sequence and it's really dope, really cool. And then he had a personal, like his own Star Wars or whatever his monumental thing that he wanted to build was like, I want to do this. And they're like, yeah, just do Maze Runner first. And then he did all 3 of Maze Runner. And then he recently did one of the Planet of the Apes movies. And he was also working on Mouse Guard or something. He's been super busy and he hustles really hard. He's this really awesome guy from Florida. But I can't help but think that his dreams keep deferring for the studio's needs. And I think that's a common tale.
Yeah.
And if you really want to, you have to like withdraw yourself almost from the system in order to like reboot yourself and like make those things happen. Like you have to take some kind of a hit almost professionally in order to like reset yourself and reestablish what that thing is. And the old story, it's like, well, Coppola had the money to do this, so he like self-financed Apocalypse Now, and like think of how hard it was for him to do that. Like no studio was gonna, even in that time in the 70s when cinema was just like, this is comfortable, this is a business model that works. Like even then they're like, we're nervous. Like there was still a lot of nervousness about people's personal projects, I think. And so I think that's always going to be an element, is that you believe it, you envision it, you can see it clear in your mind, but until it's real, like you have a lot more convincing to do of all the people around you. And sometimes the pathway of getting there can be very tough. So way to bring it down, John.
There was another question in the tan jacket.
Yeah, you kind of touched upon this question a little bit. I was just curious
really dream of being able to do one day? And then the second part of the question would be, how would you reconcile this desire with what the market wants you to do, or the market thinks it wants you to do?
Yeah, those two things are usually at odds against each other, because until it's proven to be financially successful, actually the process of Spider-Verse, as an example, now everybody loves it. It won the Oscar. It's a huge hit. In the early development stages, that was not the case. They actually got rid of the guy who invented that whole style, Alberto Miogo, Spanish, brilliant genius. He won 2 Emmys for his work on Love, Death, and Robots. He has 2 shorts that are brilliant. Actually, in my opinion, better than Spider-Verse. But he developed that Spider-Verse look. Then he's kind of a hard guy to work with. So then they kind of got rid of him. He's brilliant, though. He's brilliant. I don't know him personally. I'm just kind of, I know people know him. Anyway, and so, yeah, everybody loves Spider-Verse now, right? It's brilliant. The little bits and it's visually incredible. But that's not always the case. Personally, I feel like I haven't seen yet the style that I really want to use to tell. And also style and story kind of have to go hand in hand, right? So you can't just say, it's one thing to kind of experiment with a style just to make sure it works. And it's another thing to marry it to a story that actually makes it cohesive. So there are sometimes, I'll watch some animation done in the 50s from some independent animation from the 50s, and the style and the story and the energy and the timing, it's seamless. And it's just somebody scribbling or something. So I think that's an ongoing thing. So for me personally, I haven't really seen it yet. I do feel like the blending of 2D and 3D or whatever, your computer and hand drawn, however, those are completely blurred right now. You can't really, I don't think they're that easily separated. The ingredients are basically always the same, but how you finish the platter or whatever, how you plate it is going to be, different. So yeah, I think I still have yet to see the style that I'm looking for to tell the right story.
I still want to see the Paperman feature. I thought that was a really good style. And I thought that it was clumsy and tedious to do, but it looked really elegant, and it had a refinement that I thought allowed I think a shift in the way people were seeing animation, because I was personally getting kind of bored, and there was a monotony happening in the style of especially I think between Illumination, Sony, Pixar, and what Disney were all doing in the 2005 to 2010, felt like it was all kind of converging on the same product in terms of the texture. But Arcane was cool.
Yeah.
There was some stuff happening in I think there's a What If, that Marvel What If. It was I saw some stuff I was I want to see that as a movie. And it is like a moving illustration, and a lot of stuff I really like from Bernie Fuchs and Fawcett, the illustrators from the 50s and 60s, in the time where people really knew how to draw and really knew how to do great illustration. If you look those guys up, I want to see that move. That's a cool look. It's flat, but it's dimensional. The color's incredible. The textures are all beautiful, and all sorts of variety in there. I could see. I thought Gwen's world in Spider-Verse was moving into the Fawcett Fuchs universe a lot, and I thought they're really killing it, So I really have a lot of respect for what they're doing, and the brand is. I'm imagining they're going to take it even further, because each time they do Spider-Verse, they keep expanding the palette and the texture of what they're doing. So they really are at the bleeding edge of it in terms of pushing. But they're exhausting movies. I find. So.
I think we have. Oh, do you want to answer?
I'll just add, there's storytelling, and then there's animation, the medium, the art form, the look, the style of it. And sometimes, yeah, the story and the art form, they kind of, one's better than this, like, it's the finding the balance of when the art form really matches the storytelling. And I think that is where you find the sweet spot. So whatever style it is, just marrying it to the story you're telling, and that there's a purpose. Yeah, so, anyways.
Tonio, you had a question?
Yeah, so going off the translation of story into animation that you guys as animators do, my big question is similar to the talk about media and this idea that we're consuming media now, that it's accelerating or seemingly. How do you guys address how you draw the line between the product and art, and the way that animation nowadays seems to be leaning more towards becoming just a product? It reminds me of like the latest film I watched, that was Garfield. And that's something you watch and maybe you question like, how far away are we moving away from art?
No.
When I was a kid, it was like Transformers was a GoBots, He-Man. They were all toys. Like they were products. They were a way of realizing a world that supported the sale of toys. So I think that was like a functioning business model then. And if there's a bright spot of art in there, then that's exciting too. But I have felt like the balance between, like, I think what you were talking about is more like commerce versus art is what I really struggle with, which is you have to honor at least somewhat the commerce side of it, or else you're not going to be working. And there's a really good podcast on The Office that is it Brian Baumgartner?
Yeah.
He kind of hosts this.
Kevin from The Office.
Yeah, Kevin hosts this podcast about the genesis of The Office and how that first season is like really like it's tough. Like it's hard to watch. It's so painful and cringy. And Michael is such a jerk to everybody. And so NBC was like, guys, we got to do something here. And the writers were like, no, we're making, we're doing this the way we're doing it. But the guy who ran The Office was like, guys, we got to do something here. And I think the studio was like, can you just give us a little bit of hope at the end of, like when the studio says something like that to you, can we just have a little bit of hope at the end of each episode? Of course, when the writers got that, it's such a good podcast because it really defines that struggle between art and commerce. But they're like, no, like we're not doing that. We're not going to change it. But the guy who, the showrunner, the guy who developed it, he's like, no, we're going to do something. So in the second season, that's when you see, like, I think the first time I noticed it was when Michael like totally nails a sale of like, he just sells like a ton of paper at this guy's office. And you're like, wow, he's a really good salesman. He's kind of like has another side to him that like totally dimensionalizes the character and totally expands your understanding of what the show is. And it made the show much more popular and much more accessible. And I think it was like, there's a stubborn way of just shutting down. This is the nunchi thing I was kind of connecting to, where you're like, the writers didn't have nunchi. They weren't reading the room. Like, guys, you're not gonna have a second season if you don't like turn something here. And I think that it's the way they respond to that request for, we're not saying make it commercial, we're just saying make it accessible so it can be commercially successful, and I think that's kind of the way that I think there's a maturity to the way I have an understanding now of the way studios operate, which you can let it steamroll you and the art can be totally crushed under that steamroller. Or you can try to answer that request for accessibility and likable characters and all those cliches that you hear that the studios are asking for. There's ways of answering those things in ways that are creative and exciting and fresh and good, that are still within the realm of the keeping honest to the work that you're trying to make. I don't know if I'm getting my point across, but yeah, go ahead.
Oh, do you have something to add?
Yeah, I'll just add this. I think also when you're talking about Garfield,
Back to Garfield.
yeah, I think, yeah, of course, if you see that, you're like, oh, like you're just, but I do think that there are things that are happening in the industry that are like such bright little moments that just don't have the same, I don't know, Garfield level of just marketing and brand, you know, like it's not out there, but I think it's important to not base everything on just that one film. Yeah.
Like the episode of Bluey is like,
Yeah.
it gets mystical and magic and like and ethereal at the, you were just telling me about it, but
Yeah.
Bluey?
Bluey.
there was this episode of Bluey that has to do with summer camp, and she described at the end was like mystical and very unique. And it's like, well, you could look at it's like you're cynically trapped in this box of a toddler's children's show, or you can like work within the confines of that to find things that no one ever expected. So
Yeah. There is light in the darkness.
but Garfield's not good.
Fortunately, that's all the time we have for. Can we please give these wonderful folks a round of applause?